Hey everybody, my name is Jim Farmer. I'm the festival director of Out on Film. Thanks for joining us. This is our 34th year of presenting stories for, by, and about our community and its allies. This is, however, our first hybrid festival. We'll have screenings in theater and we'll have screenings virtual as well, accompanied by a lot of great interviews, including one with Jeffrey Schwarz. Jeffrey's new film is Boulevard, a Hollywood story. This screening is sponsored by Warner Media. And thank you, Jeffrey.
I'm happy to be here. 34 years. Congratulations.
Thanks so much. And we had the ulcers to prove it. I'm going to read a brief description of the documentary, and then we'll jump in with some questions. In the documentary Boulevard, a Hollywood story, Dixon Hughes and Richard Stapley, two young songwriters and romantic partners, find themselves caught in movie star Gloria Swanson's web when she hires them to write a musical version of Sunset Boulevard. This is such a fascinating documentary. It's just so detailed. But I'm going to have to ask you, what made you want to tell the story?
Well, I've loved Sunset Boulevard from years back. And I always say our taste in movies sometimes comes out before we do. And that movie clearly has a gay following and a gay appeal, mostly probably because of the Norma Desmond character that Gloria Swanson played, a bigger than life character. But I read a book about the making of Sunset Boulevard. And in that book, there was one chapter about this attempt to make a musical out of Sunset Boulevard in the early 50s with Gloria Swanson herself trying to mount this with the help of Richard and Dixon, two young men who were gay partners at the time in the 50s. And there wasn't a ton of detail in this chapter. It was enough to whet my appetite. And I knew one of the people that was interviewed for the book about it because he was friends with Dixon Hughes. And that was Alan Eichler, who ended up being one of our executive producers. And I called Alan and I said, I need to know this whole story. Please tell me. And he said, I've been waiting for 25 years for somebody to call me about this. So he was dying to tell the story. And he had tried, Alan, to tell the story in the 90s through a little stage musical of his own, which is in the movie. And maybe that's a spoiler, so we don't have to go there. But yeah, I started thinking about it and didn't know. At first, I started thinking maybe this could be a scripted project because I didn't know if there was any archival related to the story. But then through Alan and through some other people that I met who were friends with Richard and Dixon, I ended up uncovering some interviews with the two men and then visiting Gloria Swanson's archive in Austin, Texas at the Harry Ransom Center. It turns out that she saved everything from her entire career, including all the materials on the musical, including test recordings they did of all the songs where she sings all the songs. So I'm like, at that point, I knew this could be a doc because I love finding this these sort of archaeological treasures in the course of making a movie, and that's what you want. You need the stuff to see and hear in a documentary. So we were off to the races.
This is such a fascinating subject, but it's interesting that you didn't know about this until you read the book.
I didn't know about it, and even people who are big fans of classic Hollywood and even Broadway fanatics didn't know about this. And it was rumored, there were rumors about it. And even Stephen Sondheim at one point had tried to make a musical version of Sunset Boulevard. This is way after Richard and Dixon had their crack at it. And then of course, Andrew Lloyd Webber did his version, which is the most famous version that premiered in the early 90s and is still going. It was just recently revived with Glenn Close, and they're talking about making that into a movie. So this story just keeps on going and going.
So I have to ask you, as someone who loves Sunset Boulevard, what was it like discovering the Gloria Swanson archive? I mean, how long did you just like geek out just with all the material there?
Oh man, I love archives. If I wasn't making movies, I would probably be working in an archive. I'll be a librarian like my mother is, or used to be. She was a high school librarian for many years. But going to the archive, she wanted to find a home for her archive. She had been saving everything from her teenage years, right? So she had every canceled check, every screenplay, every contract, and photographs from the entire range of her career. She was a pack rat. She saved everything, but she wasn't a hoarder. I mean, she had everything organized, So in the before she died, she was trying to find a home for her archive, and she ended up working with the Harry Ransom Center. And they also have a lot of other archives too. I mean, they have David O. Selznick, who produced Gone with the Wind, and Robert De Niro, and they have a lot of amazing things in their archive. But they have the Gloria Swanson archive. So going through that material, I mean, she had everything in folders. So in terms of the musical, she had a whole box with the musical material. So there was a sheet music, and there were letters back and forth between her and Paramount Pictures, and letters with Dixon and Richard, and photographs of the three of them together. Because sometimes you don't know how real a story is until you
Exactly.
see the actual evidence. And so there's, oh my God, we found pictures of Richard and Dixon and her together. And there's only a handful of them that survived, but thank God that they did. So I'm really grateful to Gloria, even though she never really talked about this incident in her life. She wrote a autobiography before she passed away in the early 80s, and she didn't mention this at all. So I found that really interesting, but she did keep it alive for the years, even after the 50s, when they were attempting to do this together. She never really let go of that dream to do it. And she didn't live long enough to see Andrew Lloyd Webber's, but I'm sure she wouldn't have been too thrilled about seeing someone else play Norma Desmond and not her.
Exactly. What were the audio recordings like?
Well, they're reel-to-reel recordings, and they were done probably, state of the art at the time. So you can hear pages turning, and you can hear people coughing in the background, and it's Gloria and Dixon. Richard's not in any of the recordings, but it's Dixon. And because Dixon and her had a relationship that actually survived the debacle of the writing of this musical. So these tapes exist. I don't know too much about how they survived all these years, other than that she just kept them in her archive. And Dixon said that she used to play them at cocktail parties. She was so proud of this, and she never really let it go.
Yeah.
And you can hear what might have been in these recordings.
How long did you work on this film?
Well, from that first light bulb moment was probably about 8 years ago. It was when I Am Divine was on the festival circuit, and I was thinking about other projects. So, with documentaries, you never really know how long these things are going to take. Once you open that Pandora's box, you better be ready for what's going to come, and stay on this path and be diligent, because it could take years. So it was about 8 years. And a lot of that time was research, and a lot of that time was looking for funding and doing the interviews, and also waiting to convince people to participate. People don't always jump at the chance to be involved in something like this. It's their own story. It's very personal. So sometimes a lot of it is just relationship building and taking the time. And then finding Richard Stapley's former wife, I didn't even know she was still alive. And I have a friend of mine who's sort of like an like a detective, and she finds people. And I said, do you think this woman's still around? And she found her. She was in England, living in England. And, we started talking, and then eventually she decided, okay, I'm going to tell my story. And so she did that. And that was all over the phone. That was all over Skype. So a lot of the filmmaking was, especially over the past year and a half, 2 years, was over Skype and Zoom. And, I was home like everybody else over the last year and a half, and spent a lot of that time working on the post-production of this film. So in a way, it was good timing, bad timing for the rest of the world. But in terms of creative projects, I know a lot of people who use this time just to kind of dig into their projects, and this was one of them.
I was going to ask you, because obviously the last year, we've all been, limited to what we can do. But what's it like having to do all the work, finishing work on this without seeing people and just, talking to them via Zoom?
Well, it's like we're doing now. It becomes normalized at a certain point. And I've started to see this kind of technology creeping into documentaries over the last few years. And I think we're going to see more and more of it. I know Alex Gibney, when he did his documentary about COVID, he was wheeling camera rigs to the front doors of his interview subjects and have them wheel it in and set up the camera on themselves. So all these things. We got to keep making movies, and this is a great tool. I was able to do some interviews for this film over Skype, and it kind of worked. Because I wanted to show a little bit of the process of what it's like to make a documentary and the different paths that you follow. And sometimes we have conversations like this.
I was going to ask you next about the decision to include yourself as in this film.
That was not the intention early on. I did not expect that to be the case. And this may be the last time I do it. I'm not generally a fan of being on camera, but it seemed to work. I was working with a collaborator on the project, Elijah Drenner, who's also a filmmaker, and he was helping with an edit. And he suggested this to me. He's like, well, what if you are in the movie, and what if we show you looking for the materials? And, what if you're part of the story? And I really kind of liked that, not to make me a character in the movie necessarily, but to show the process of making a doc and how I'm sort of a facilitator opening these doors. And so I'm sort of a stand-in for the audience and what questions the audience might have.
I was I was really struck watching this film at the similarities between Sunset Boulevard and what happened here between these characters. Can you talk about that?
It's incredible. Yeah, I mean, that's also part of the why I thought this could make a good film, is because the parallels between this classic movie, Sunset Boulevard, and the lives that our three characters are living.
Mhm.
In Sunset Boulevard, it's an older actress who is wanting her big comeback, and she brings in a handsome young writer to help her with this. In our story, it's an older actress who is looking for kind of a new comeback vehicle, and she brings in a handsome younger man into her life, and she starts to fall for him, and feelings develop and things get complicated. And there's so many parallels that I thought we could play with that, and we could show clips from the original Sunset Boulevard to juxtapose what's going on in real life. So it's like life imitating art, imitating life. And even Sunset Boulevard itself is parallels her own life, because it's a story of, in the movie she's sort of a washed up silent movie actress, right? So in real life, yes, Gloria Swanson was a silent movie actress and she wasn't really making films anymore, but she was certainly not washed up. I mean, and she was a celebrity. She was not
Mhm.
forgotten living in a crumbling mansion. I mean, she had her own TV talk show in the afternoon. She was like an early Martha Stewart prototype, She was a celebrity. She wasn't making films or playing parts, but she was playing the role of Gloria Swanson. So she had her own, makeup line and clothes line and TV show, as I mentioned, and she was very visible and on talk shows, and
Mhm.
she was very opinionated, and she was ahead of her time on so many things. Like, she was an early practitioner of yoga in the 50s when nobody was doing that, and she was all about organic foods when nobody was thinking about those kinds of things, and the environment and pollution and spirituality and all these things that I think the public maybe thought she was a little bit cuckoo, but she was right about all these things. And sugar, she had a crusade against sugar. She was obsessed with sugar and how it's poison. And she would even go to her granddaughter told me a story about her. They were at the shopping mall, and there was a Santa giving out candy to the kids, and she went up to Santa and said, "You're poisoning the children." So she was hardcore about sugar.
You referred to this earlier, but obviously Sunset Boulevard and Gloria Swanson are so iconic in the LGBT community. Why do you think that is?
That's a great question, and I've thought about this a lot. And why are we attracted to these kinds of characters? Why are we attracted to these bigger than life, kind of almost tragic characters? And I don't have the answer to that. I know for me, when I look at the movie now, and I'm a gentleman of a certain age as well. I'm 52. Gloria, in that film, she was 50. And there's something about holding on to our youth, I think, for gay people, gay men especially, that once you hit a certain age, maybe you're like considered over the hill, or that the world doesn't see the value in you as much as they did. There's such a pride, there's such an emphasis on youth and beauty. And we have so much, older people have so much obviously to offer. So maybe that's one of the reasons that people connect to her, but also she's just fabulous, and she doesn't care what the world thinks about her. She's going to live the way she wants. She's goes after what she wants. She's going after a younger man, which is very taboo. So that might be part of it too, like this sort of forbidden love, and the world is judging her, but she doesn't care. So I don't know. It's I would love to hear what other people say about this, but for me, I just love her performance. It's a very knowing performance. It's almost a silent movie performance with dialogue,
Mhm.
and the parallels with her own life and Norma Desmond, because she probably knew people like this. So
Exactly.
I don't know. I just love the movie, and I could watch it over and over and over and never get tired of it.
You mentioned this earlier. Obviously, after Sunset Boulevard, Gloria Swanson was still very visible, and she said she had her talk show. She was out there. She was a celebrity. But in terms of you know her film career, I just always thought it was ironic that she had this great success with Sunset Boulevard. But then in terms of films after that, not as much. Can you talk a little bit about why? And do you know why maybe that happened?
It's a kind of a mystery to me.
Mhm.
And she had done dozens of movies, but she didn't really make a lot of movies in the 40s. She made a few, but nothing that really broke through. And then after Sunset Boulevard, she did do a movie immediately after where she was playing a mom on a train. And it was sort of this wacky love story, Caper on a Train.
Uh-huh.
And it was a bomb, and it's not a good movie. I saw it. I'm glad it exists because we used a lot of clips from it, but it's not that great. And there was really no follow-up. And once Betty Davis and Joan Crawford did Whatever Happened to Baby Jane, you would think like, oh my God, why didn't Gloria Swanson do one of those movies, and
Exactly.
they're known. Unfortunately, they're known as hag movies, which is like movies with older actresses that the public knew as young and beautiful, and now there were not so much either of those things anymore, right? I love those movies because they gave these actresses some great scenery to chew.
Exactly.
Gloria never did them, and I'm sure she was offered those. I know for a fact she was offered those things, but she turned them all down, and and maybe she was right to do that because she felt maybe it would have not been good for her legacy, because Tallulah Bankhead did them, and of course Joan and Betty Davis, Olivia de Havilland did them, Lana Turner, they all did, but she didn't. So I kind of fantasize about what that movie would be like. What would her 1960s hag movie be? But she didn't want to do that anymore. She didn't want to play versions of Norma Desmond anymore, which made it so interesting that she wanted to play Norma Desmond on stage every night. So
exactly. I'm a big lover of the Academy Awards. I'm always going back and saying, this person should have won, or this movie should have won. But I mean, when she didn't win the Oscar that a lot of people thought she deserved to win, how devastated was she? Was she devastated? Did she take it in stride? But how was it moving forward?
She put on a good face. If you see the stills from that night, she didn't win the Oscar, and she wanted it. But she was never going to go around saying, "Oh, that should have been me." She wasn't that kind of person. She was disappointed, but she was very supportive of the actress who did win that night. And she embraced her, and she was very gracious about it. She did win the Golden Globe Award, so that's one thing the Golden Globes got right, of giving her that award. But yeah, I think she would have appreciated having that. But what a year! I mean, that had Betty Davis, it had the cast of All About Eve, and actually something that people don't really talk about is the lead actress who was in Caged, the women in prison movie. She was nominated, Eleanor Parker from Sound of Music. She was nominated that year too, and she gives an amazing performance in Caged. So if your audience wants to see one of the great women's prison movies of all time, Caged would be that, and that was made in 1952. So it's quite a year.
Great. Okay, so this is the part of the interview where we sort of segue into more of your career. And just for people out there, we've been working with Jeffrey Schwarz for such a long time. We show so many of these documentaries. It's kind of a joke in our programmer land that every 2 years at the beginning of the year, we just sort of pencil in Jeffrey Schwarz documentary, just in the hope that he will make a great documentary to show. And you've made so many great films over the years. I mean, Vito was such a big movie for us. That was the first time that we are used to be a yearly festival. That Vito was the first time we did something outside of that time. It was a huge success. I Am Divine, Tab Hunter Confidential, The Fabulous Alan Carr. You actually came down here in 2017 and accepted our Icon Award, and that was such a great moment to have you down. I'd met you at festivals, but it was nice to actually have you here and have a conversation. But you've been such a valuable part of film festivals, across the country and world, and part of the LGBTQ culture. But I mean, in terms of the work you do, how do you it seems like you're always working on a project. How do you find themes and subjects for your next documentaries?
Thank you for saying all that. It really means a lot to me. And I remember coming to Atlanta for in 2017, right? Yeah, and that was a real honor, and I appreciate it very much. And I couldn't do the work I do without the support of the audiences. I really think about, when I think about a movie to make, I really do think about the audience first. And me as an audience member, like, what do I want to see? So this film, Boulevard, he's like, wow, I would love to see a melodrama, like this. I would love to see a real deep dive into this story. So I'm going to make this, and if it pleases me, hopefully it will please other people, please the audience, And there's just so many stories from our past, collectively, our queer past, that haven't been told yet. And as time goes on, memory fades. And Gore Vidal called this country the United States of Amnesia, and I believe that to be true, So I make these movies to kind of rejuvenate interest in the past and make them as entertainments. They're not movies that are like medicine. A lot of documentaries, people might think that they're going to be like, we're going to teach you something, or we're going to make you take your medicine. And for me, it's like, if you learn something along the way, that's great. But I just want to have the audience connect to it as a story with characters that they can care about and root for, and cry when they pass, And a lot of the films, that's what happens, So you're going along for a journey, and hopefully along the way, you're learning about our community and the struggles of people of the past had to go through. Like in this film, Richard and Dixon never really got the chance to tell their own story. They They were romantic partners at a time where you had to keep that very, very secret. And, certainly there were people living happy gay lives as opposed to a lot of the stories we see pre-Stonewall, which are tragic stories. There were plenty of people who were in long-term committed relationships and living happy, fulfilled lives. They just had to do it behind closed doors. And so with a film like this, I wanted to give the audience a sense of what a relationship like that could be in the 50s, and that there were men in love and there were women in love at the time. But now we can look back at these stories and tell them openly.
How difficult was it back then for them to be partners, but not to be out and visible, to have to keep it under wraps?
Well, they were both married, more than once, and that was something that many gay men did, just for appearance's sake, and to just not have the stress of suspicion and whispers and rumor, like, well, we'll just get married and then we won't have to really worry about what people will say, right? And the women they married, some of them, I'm sure most of them knew, or many of them knew. I know Dixon had been married. I don't know really the full story behind that marriage that didn't last too long. But Richard was also married more than once. He was married a couple times. And we interviewed his second wife for the film, and she was fully aware that he was gay. They never talked about it. It was sort of a thing that she says in the film, I'm intuitive. I'm a Scorpio, I'm intuitive. So they never talked about it. And it was more like a friendship than a love affair, she said. But that enabled Richard to move through the world as a straight man, or the assumption was that he was a straight man, and he could have a career that way. There was no way at that time that he could be openly gay or have, it was just impossible to think about. But he I think toward the end of his life, he did open up a little bit, and he was writing an autobiography, and he was sort of moving to that place of talking about things openly. He never really fully got there, but Dixon did. Dixon, in his 60s and 70s, he lived in West Hollywood. He was involved with an early HIV/AIDS group called Project Angel Food, which delivered home meals to homebound people with AIDS. And he was part of all those early fundraisers. And he lost a partner later in his life, a long-term partner. That's not touched on in the film. So I don't know. I found it enormously moving. These two men who no one really has ever heard of, and they would be really forgotten if not for this film. And there's a really important story there to tell. And I love them both, and I hope they're happy wherever they are, knowing that this is going on and their names are being spoken again.
Exactly. I know that one time you were working on a Showgirls documentary.
Yes, absolutely. Still working on it.
Okay.
I usually work on multiple things at once. So it's called Goddess, the Fall and Rise of Showgirls, which is a dream project, and we're fully in the can. All the interviews are shot, and we're about 80% edited. We're just looking for some finishing funds, which is always what these things take so long. It's just like looking for the cash. So once that's in place, we'll be able to wrap it up and hopefully have that movie out in the circuit and in Atlanta before too long. I'm sure there's many Showgirls fans in Atlanta.
Oh yes. Okay, final question. So what's next for this documentary, and what are some other projects you're working on?
Well, this film is on the circuit right now. We launched it at Outfest, and now we're playing in multiple festivals all around the country and around the world, some hybrid, some in person, some both, like you guys are doing. And we're working on distribution and hopefully find a home for it beyond the festivals. That's usually what we try to do. Sure. And in the meantime, I'm working on the Showgirls doc, and I have another film called Mineshaft, which is it's the story of the true life murder that inspired the making of William Friedkin's Cruising from 1980. Oh, wow. And it's very different kind of story for me. It's very dark. It's more like, I look at these docs in terms of genre, like the Boulevard is my musical, and this next one is my first real horror movie, and I can't wait to share it with the world. It's, I don't want to say too much about it, but it's in the works. Okay, great. We look forward to it. The documentary is Boulevard, a Hollywood Story, sponsored by Warner Media, and out on film both in theaters and streaming. Jeffrey Schwarz is the director. Thank you so much again for talking to us, and thank you so much for your work over the years. It's always a pleasure talking to you and getting a chance to catch up with you again. Thanks. And I want to thank you for all the work that you do and keeping your festival thriving and alive and providing a place for people to come together in your community. We couldn't make these, there'd be no reason to make movies if there's nowhere to show them, so I appreciate what you do. I know it's a lot of work and sometimes a thankless job. So I'm here to thank you. Well, thank you so much. I appreciate it. Always a pleasure, Jeffrey. Okay. Take care.